She was missing for 4 days until lonely Cowboy found her, freezing in a barn. It was a cold, quiet morning in the small town of Willow Creek. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, but the air was sharp and biting. Emily Parker, a 27-year-old schoolteacher, loved mornings like this. She loved the peace, the calm, and the feeling that the world was still hers for a while before it became busy and loud. That morning, she had planned a short hike through the woods near her home, something she did almost every week. It was her way of relaxing, clearing her mind and feeling connected to nature. Emily's routine was simple. She usually packed a small backpack with water, a few snacks, her phone, and a warm scarf. She dressed in layers because she knew that the weather could change quickly in winter. She kissed her cat, Luna, on the head and stepped out the door. The snow on the ground crunched under her boots, and the air smelled like frost and pine. She waved to her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who was tending to her small garden, and started down the familiar path that led to the woods. At first, everything seemed normal. The path was lined with tall trees whose branches were heavy with snow, creating a sort of tunnel that made Emily feel safe. Birds chirped occasionally, and the wind whispered through the branches. Emily loved walking alone here. It gave her time to think, to dream, and to enjoy the silence. But this morning, something felt a little different. The forest felt quieter than usual. Even the birds seemed absent. She shrugged it off, thinking it was just the winter chill keeping them hidden. As Emily walked deeper into the woods, she thought about her day ahead. She had plans to meet some friends for dinner, and she wanted to stop by the library to return a book. She hummed a tune quietly to herself, trying to stay cheerful despite the cold. The snow was thick in places, and she had to step carefully to avoid slipping on the ice that formed under the white blanket. She didn't notice that she had strayed a little further from the main trail than usual. The forest, which had always seemed friendly, now felt vast and endless, with tall trees looming over her like silent giants. Back in the town, Emily's family began to notice when she didn't return at her usual time. Her mother, Susan, was the first to grow worried. She had expected Emily back hours ago and had already prepared lunch for her, knowing Emily liked to eat right after a walk. Susan called her daughter's phone, but there was no answer. She tried again, thinking Emily might be somewhere quiet and couldn't hear the ringing. Still, no answer. Panic started to creep in. Emily was careful and responsible. She never missed a call without reason. Something must have gone wrong. Susan called her husband, Mark, and together they decided to check the woods near their home. They bundled up in warm clothes, grabbed flashlights, and started walking the familiar paths. The snow had piled higher than usual, making it harder to move quickly. As they called out Emily's name, their voices sounded small and fragile against the towering trees and the thick silence. Hours passed, and the cold began to seep into their bones. They returned home shivering, but more determined than ever to find her. Word of Emily's disappearance spread quickly. Neighbors, friends, and local authorities began organizing a search. People volunteered to help, despite the snow and freezing temperatures. Some searched the nearby woods, others checked abandoned buildings and sheds, and some even walked along the river, hoping to spot any sign of her. Flyers with Emily's photo were posted in the town square, at the grocery store, and on every telephone pole along the roads. Everyone in Willow Creek felt the worry, a heavy, unshakable feeling that settled over the town like the winter frost. Meanwhile, Emily continued her walk unaware of the fear that was growing back in her town. She had realized that she might be lost when she noticed that the trail markers she usually followed were covered by snow. The familiar sounds and landmarks that guided her were gone, under a thick, white blanket. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself that she could find her way back if she just focused. But the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, and shadows from the tall trees made her feel smaller and more isolated than ever before. As the day went on, the temperature dropped. Wind swept through the trees, carrying cold and snowflakes that stung Emily's cheeks. She tried to find shelter, moving quickly but cautiously, scanning the trees for something she could use as protection. She spotted an old, abandoned barn in the distance and thought it might be a good place to rest and get out of the wind for a while. With each step toward the structure, her hope grew that she might be safe for the night. Emily's mind raced with worry. She thought about her family, her cat Luna, and the warm home she had left behind. Having moved, she felt a pang of guilt for worrying them, but she also felt a deep determination to stay alive. She gathered some loose branches near the barn to create a small barrier against the wind, and huddled under the eaves. Her hands and feet were numb, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep her body heat close. She whispered to herself, "I can do this. I'll be okay. I just have to survive." Back in Willow Creek, the search intensified as night fell. Headlamps and flashlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows over the snow. Volunteers called out Emily's name again and again, their voices echoing in the silent forest. Authorities coordinated the search, making sure no area was left unchecked. Even though the town was small, the effort was enormous, and every person involved felt a heavy sense of urgency. They knew that with freezing temperatures, time was critical. Every hour that passed made the situation more dangerous. That night, Emily lay in the barn, feeling the cold sink deeper into her bones. She tried to focus on staying awake and alert, moving slightly to keep her blood flowing. She remembered lessons from a survival guide she had once read. Small movements conserving energy and finding shelter were essential. She closed her eyes briefly, but the cold and fear would not let her rest for long. Instead, she kept thinking about her family, hoping that someone would find her soon. By the end of that first day, Emily had survived hours, alone in the freezing wilderness. Her courage and determination had kept her moving, kept her alive, even when she felt small and vulnerable. She had no idea what the night ahead would bring, or who might find her. But deep inside, a spark of hope remained, a quiet voice telling her to hold on, to keep trying, and to never give up. And so, the first day passed, filled with fear, struggle, and uncertainty, but also with quiet courage. Emily Parker, lost in the snowy forest, had begun a fight for survival, one that would test her in ways she had never imagined. Every step she had taken, every thought she had whispered to herself, brought her closer to an uncertain future, one where hope would become her most powerful companion. Tom Whitaker lived on the edge of Willow Creek, in a small, weathered ranch that had been in his family for generations. But he was a quiet man in his late 40s, known around town as a hard worker, and someone who preferred the company of his horses and the open land to the crowded streets and noisy gatherings. People in town sometimes called him a lonely cowboy. But Tom didn't mind. He liked the peace of his life, the slow rhythm of chores, the whispering wind across his pastures. Most days, the world outside his ranch felt distant, almost like a story he could observe, but didn't need to be part of. That evening, the wind was colder than usual, sweeping across the hills with a sharpness that made even the most rugged fences creak. Tom was finishing up his chores, feeding the horses and checking the fences to make sure nothing had been broken by the heavy snow and wind. His boots crunched in the fresh snow as he moved around the barn, lantern in hand, and he muttered to himself quietly, noting which areas needed extra attention. The night was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that made even a simple sound echo. As he moved to the back of the barn, Tom noticed something unusual. A small, shadowy figure seemed to be huddled in the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of hay. At first, he thought it might be a stray animal seeking shelter from the cold. The shape was so still and small, it barely seemed alive. But something didn't feel right. Tom's instincts, honed over years of living on the land, told him to investigate carefully. He set down his lantern and stepped closer, his voice low and gentle as he called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The figure stirred slightly, a soft shiver that made Tom's heart tighten. He moved closer, careful not to scare whoever, or whatever, it was. As the lantern light fell on the figure, he saw a young woman, pale and trembling, wrapped in thin clothing that offered little protection from the cold. Her eyes were wide and frightened, and her lips were blue from the freezing temperature. Tom immediately realized that this was no animal. This was a person in danger. Without hesitation, Tom took off his thick coat and approached her slowly, speaking in a calm, reassuring voice. "It's okay. You're safe now. Come on, let's get you out of the cold." The young woman looked at him with a mix of confusion and relief. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too violently for words to come out clearly. Tom gently helped her to her feet, supporting her under the arms, and guided her toward the warmth of his cabin. The walk to the cabin was slow. Every step was careful because the snow had created slippery patches, and the young woman's legs were weak from exhaustion. Tom kept talking softly, telling her simple things to keep her calm. The snowstorm would pass, the fire would warm her, and she was safe now. He noticed that her hands were red and raw from the cold, and her breathing was shallow and uneven. His mind worked quickly as he thought about what she needed most: warmth, shelter, water, and food. Once inside the cabin, Tom set her down near the fireplace. He quickly built a fire, its flames crackling and filling the room with light and heat. He fetched a thick blanket from a nearby chair and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. The young woman leaned into the warmth, finally able to feel some comfort, though her shivers continued. Tom moved quietly around the small cabin, putting on a kettle of water and preparing something to eat. He knew that she needed nourishment as much as heat, but he also knew that sudden food might be too harsh for her weakened state. As the fire burned, Tom finally got a better look at her face. Her hair was matted with snow, her eyes filled with fear, and her skin was cold to the touch. He guessed she had been outside for hours, maybe even days. He realized she might have been lost, alone, and struggling to survive in the freezing forest. A surge of concern and empathy filled him. He had spent his life living off the land, but he had never imagined finding someone so close to death from exposure. "Can you tell me your name?" Tom asked gently, kneeling beside her. "Emily," she whispered, her voice trembling but growing stronger as she felt safer. "Emily, I'm Tom. You're safe now. Just rest for a moment, okay?" She nodded weakly, closing her eyes as the warmth of the fire began to seep into her frozen body. Tom could see how exhausted she was, and he understood that she needed more than just physical warmth. She needed reassurance, someone who could remind her that she wasn't alone anymore. While she rested, Tom reflected on the unusual turn of events. He had always been self-reliant, living a life where emergencies were mostly about animals or weather. Finding a human in need like this was rare. But in that moment, everything else faded away. His focus was entirely on helping her survive, keeping her calm and making sure she would recover from the ordeal she had endured. He moved around the cabin quietly, setting a kettle of water to boil. The sound of the bubbling water was oddly comforting in the otherwise silent room. He prepared a small cup of warm tea with sugar and carefully handed it to her. Emily sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through her body. She shivered less now, and her breathing began to stabilize. Tom smiled quietly, feeling a sense of relief that she was starting to recover. The hours passed slowly. Tom stayed close, checking on Emily, talking softly and making sure she was comfortable. He learned bits and pieces about her name, where she lived, and that she had been on a hike that went wrong. She spoke hesitantly at first, still too weak to recount the full story, but the trust between them grew as he listened patiently and never rushed her. As the night deepened, the storm outside raged on, snow piling against the cabin walls, but inside, the atmosphere was calmer. Emily began to relax for the first time in days, feeling the simple comfort of being safe, warm, and cared for. Tom stayed nearby, watching the fire, feeling a quiet satisfaction in helping someone in desperate need. There was no fanfare, no recognition, just the knowledge that he had made a difference, that his actions had saved a life. By the early hours of the morning, Emily was stable enough for Tom to contact the authorities. He explained the situation calmly, giving them directions to his remote cabin and assuring them that she was alive and conscious. Within the hour, officers were on their way, navigating the snow-covered roads to reach the ranch. Emily listened quietly, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. Soon she would be reunited with her family, and the nightmare of the past days would begin to fade. When the officers finally arrived, they were impressed by Tom's quick thinking and calm demeanor. They confirmed Emily's identity, making calls to her family to deliver the long-awaited news. Emily's parents, who had been searching desperately and worrying day and night, arrived soon after, tears streaming down their faces as they embraced their daughter. Emily hugged Tom as well, thanking him for saving her life. Words felt inadequate, but the gratitude was unmistakable. After Emily was safely in the care of her family, Tom returned to his cabin. The quiet returned, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire and the wind outside. He reflected on the events of the night, feeling a mix of relief, humility, and wonder. In the span of a few hours, a lonely cowboy had become the hero in someone's story, not through fame or recognition, but through courage, compassion, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. Though Tom's life would return to its quiet routine, the memory of that night would remain. He had witnessed fear, fragility, and hope all in one room, and he had played a crucial role in turning despair into survival. Emily, too, would carry the memory of his kindness for the rest of her life. Their paths had crossed in extraordinary circumstances, leaving an indelible mark on both of them. And so, in a small cabin on the edge of a snow-covered valley, a lonely cowboy and a young woman who had been lost in the freezing forest shared a moment that would never be forgotten. It was a story of survival, courage, and the unexpected ways that human lives can intersect, even in the quietest corners of the world. By the time the night had deepened, Emily Parker was beginning to feel the warmth of the fire seeping into her frozen body. Her shivers had slowed and the color was returning to her pale cheeks. She had been alone, cold and terrified for 4 long days, but now, for the first time, she felt a fragile sense of safety. Tom Whitaker, the quiet cowboy who had found her, moved around the small cabin with calm precision, his every action focused on helping her recover. He had given her his coat to wrap tightly around herself, and he had carefully placed blankets beneath her. The cabin was small, but it was warm and secure. Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily, piling higher against the windows. But inside, the fire's glow brought a sense of life and hope. Tom could see the exhaustion in Emily's eyes, but he also saw the spark of determination that had kept her alive through the days she had been lost. "Emily," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "You need to drink something warm. It will help your body get some strength back." He handed her a small cup of tea, steam rising gently from it. She held it with trembling hands, grateful for the warmth, and took small sips. The liquid traveled slowly down her throat, warming her chest and giving her a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in days. As she drank, Tom began to talk quietly, keeping her mind engaged without overwhelming her. He asked her simple questions, her favorite foods, where she had lived, little things that reminded her of home. Emily's voice was weak, but she spoke slowly, her answers measured and careful. Every word she said reminded Tom that she was real, alive, and slowly recovering. He could feel the tension in her body ease, and that gave him hope that she would survive the night. Hours passed in this quiet rhythm. Tom kept checking the fire, adding wood, and ensuring the cabin stayed warm. He prepared a small meal, something simple and easy for Emily to eat: warm soup and bread. At first, she could only manage a few bites, but as her strength returned, she ate more, her body slowly regaining the energy it had lost over the long, cold days. Tom stayed by her side, attentive and patient, letting her rest when she needed it, but ready to act if any sign of trouble appeared. Emily began to tell Tom bits of her story. She had gone for a routine hike near her home, expecting only a few hours in the woods. She had planned to return by midday, but the path had been covered with fresh snow, and familiar landmarks had vanished. Every turn she took seemed to lead her deeper into the forest. She had tried to stay calm and keep moving, but fatigue, hunger, and cold had made the journey nearly impossible. Her voice quivered as she described the fear of being alone, the terror of cold that seemed to seep into her bones, and the hopelessness she had felt when night fell. Tom listened quietly, never interrupting, offering only gentle reassurances. "You did everything you could to survive," he said. "You kept moving, stayed alert, and now you're safe. You're stronger than you realize." Emily nodded, feeling the truth of his words. In that small cabin, with the fire casting shadows on the walls and the wind howling outside, she felt the first glimmer of hope that she might actually make it through this ordeal. As the night went on, Tom realized that Emily was ready for the next step: contacting the authorities. He dialed the number for the local sheriff's office, explaining the situation calmly but with urgency. The dispatcher listened carefully and assured him that help was on the way. Emily's heart skipped with anticipation. After days of isolation and fear, the thought that someone would arrive soon to take her home filled her with relief she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. While they waited, Tom continued to care for her, offering warm drinks, blankets, and gentle conversation. He told her about the ranch, about the horses he tended, and about the quiet beauty of life on the edge of the valley. Emily listened, fascinated by the calm, steady world he described, a world so different from the panic and fear she had endured in the forest. She felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling that the world could still be kind, that life could still be gentle after such terrifying days. When the authorities finally arrived, Emily's family was already on their way. Having been informed of her rescue, officers entered the cabin with care, making sure she was stable enough to leave. Emily hugged Tom tightly, whispering her thanks over and over. Words felt too small for the gratitude she felt, but she wanted him to know that his actions had saved her life. Tom, normally reserved and private, felt a quiet warmth in his chest. He had done what anyone would do in his position, but hearing Emily's heartfelt thanks made him realize the true impact of his actions. Emily's parents arrived moments later, tears streaming down their faces as they embraced their daughter. The reunion was full of emotion, relief, gratitude, and overwhelming love. They thanked Tom repeatedly, trying to express how much it meant that he had found her, cared for her, and kept her alive. Emily held her mother's hand, looking back at Tom with a mixture of respect, admiration, and deep appreciation. She knew she owed him her life, and the memory of this night would stay with her forever. Once Emily was settled and warm in her family's care, Tom returned to the quiet of his cabin. The night outside had calmed, the snow now falling gently rather than fiercely, and the stars peered through breaks in the clouds. He looked around the small space, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He had helped someone in need, faced the storm with courage, and made a difference in a world that often seemed indifferent. Though he would return to his routine the next day, the night's events had left an indelible mark on him as well. In the days that followed, Emily recovered fully. Her parents stayed close, making sure she regained her strength, and the town of Willow Creek celebrated her safe return. Tom quietly returned to his life on the ranch, tending his horses and maintaining the fences. But the memory of Emily's rescue remained vivid. He knew that in his quiet, ordinary life, he had done something extraordinary, and the thought brought him a sense of quiet pride and fulfillment. Emily, too, would carry the memory of that night with her. The fear she had experienced, the cold, and the loneliness were all part of her story, but so was the warmth, compassion, and courage of the man who had saved her. She often thought about him, wondering how a man who had lived quietly for so long could become such a hero in someone else's life. She realized that true courage often comes in small, quiet acts, acts that might never be celebrated, but have the power to change a life completely. The story of Emily's rescue spread throughout the town, not as a tale of adventure or fame, but as a reminder of human kindness and bravery. People spoke about the lonely cowboy who had stayed calm, acted decisively, and saved a young woman from the snow and cold. They spoke about Emily's strength and resilience, and the way hope could survive even in the darkest moments. In the hearts of everyone involved, there was a quiet respect for the power of compassion and the courage it takes to act when it matters most. And so, in a small cabin on the edge of a snow-covered valley, a young woman who had been lost and freezing and a quiet, solitary cowboy shared a night that neither would ever forget. It was a night of survival, care, and human connection, an experience that would shape both of their lives in ways they would carry forever. Emily had been found, but more than that, she had been reminded that even in the coldest, loneliest moments, there is warmth, hope, and the kindness of strangers who are willing to step forward when it counts. The morning after Emily Parker was rescued, the town of Willow Creek awoke to a mixture of relief and quiet celebration. The news of her safe return spread quickly, and people felt a collective sense of joy that one of their own had survived such a dangerous ordeal. For 4 days, fear had hung over the town like a heavy cloud. Now that cloud had lifted, replaced with gratitude, hope, and a renewed appreciation for life and the kindness of others. Emily was still weak from her experience, but she was alive, warm, and surrounded by the people who loved her most. Her parents, Susan and Mark, were careful not to let her overexert herself. They helped her eat breakfast, drink warm tea, and dress in comfortable clothes, still marveling at her resilience. She had faced freezing temperatures, hunger, and exhaustion, yet she had survived. Every smile, every word she spoke that morning reflected a deep gratitude, not just for being alive, but for the people who had helped her along the way. Her thoughts, however, often returned to the man who had saved her life. Tom Whitaker, the lonely cowboy, had quietly risked his time and energy to help someone in desperate need. Emily thought about the calm, steady way he had spoken to her, how he had kept her warm, and how he had made her feel safe when the world outside had been harsh and unforgiving. His actions were a reminder that true courage does not always make the news or appear in grand gestures. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and entirely selfless, just as Tom had shown. Meanwhile, in his cabin on the edge of the snow-covered valley, Tom returned to the quiet rhythm of his life. He tended his horses, repaired fences, and prepared his fields for the coming weeks. But he was not the same as he had been before. The memory of Emily's frightened face, her shivering body, and her words of thanks stayed with him. He realized that even in his solitary life, he could make a profound difference in someone else's life. It was a lesson that filled him with a quiet sense of pride, one that required no recognition or reward beyond the knowledge that he had acted when it mattered most. Emily's family visited him at the ranch later that day. They wanted to thank him properly, to let him know the depth of their gratitude. Tom welcomed them simply, without fanfare, offering coffee and warm food. Emily's mother could barely hold back tears as she hugged him, while her father shook his hand firmly, insisting that no words could truly capture how thankful they were. Emily stood quietly, feeling a mixture of humility and admiration. She realized that the bond formed in moments of survival is often stronger than any connection built over years, because it is forged through trust, courage, and shared experience. During their visit, Tom spoke little about himself. He did not tell stories of heroism or bravery. Instead, he focused on Emily's recovery, on the small steps she needed to regain her strength, and on helping the family understand what had happened in those critical hours after he found her. His calm demeanor reassured them, his quiet confidence giving them faith that everything had been done properly. Emily listened, absorbing every word, feeling a renewed sense of safety and hope. The town of Willow Creek also wanted to honor the courage of both Emily and Tom. Local newspapers wrote careful stories about the rescue, highlighting the quick thinking, bravery, and compassion that had made survival possible. While the focus was naturally on Emily's ordeal, many articles included mention of Tom's calm and decisive actions. People in town spoke about the importance of helping neighbors, looking out for one another, and being ready to act when circumstances demand it. The story became not just one of survival, but a reminder of the strength found in community and humanity. Over the next few weeks, Emily's life slowly returned to normal. She resumed teaching, though she often thought about her time in the forest, the long, cold nights, and the fear that had threatened to overwhelm her. The experience had changed her in ways she did not fully understand. She was more patient, more aware of her own resilience, and more appreciative of the small comforts of life: warmth, food, friendship, and family. She often reflected on the kindness of strangers, realizing that heroism sometimes comes in quiet, unexpected forms. Tom, too, carried the memory of Emily with him. He continued his work on the ranch, maintaining the rhythm of his life. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his actions had made a profound impact. He rarely sought recognition, but he allowed himself a small pride in the fact that someone's life had been saved through his care and compassion. Each time he walked past the barn where he had first found her, he remembered the fear and hope in her eyes and the relief he had felt when she was finally safe. It was a memory that strengthened his understanding of the value of quiet courage. Emily also began to share her story with others, but carefully and thoughtfully. She spoke at small gatherings, at school events, and with community groups, always emphasizing the importance of staying calm, making careful decisions in emergencies, and appreciating the kindness of others. She wanted people to understand that survival is often about more than strength. It is about hope, patience, and the support of those willing to step forward in critical moments. Her words inspired many, reminding the town that even in the most frightening circumstances, humanity and compassion could shine brightly. As time passed, the bond between Emily and Tom became one of quiet respect and mutual admiration. They did not see each other often, as their lives were different and paths rarely crossed in ordinary circumstances. Yet the memory of their encounter remained strong. Emily often thought of him when walking in nature, reflecting on the calm and steady presence that had guided her through a terrifying experience. Tom thought of her when caring for his horses or walking the snow-covered fields, remembering the resilience and courage she had shown in the face of extreme adversity. The experience also had a lasting impact on the town of Willow Creek. People became more aware of the dangers of the forest in winter, ensuring that hikers were prepared and that neighbors checked on one another during storms. The story of Emily's rescue became part of local history, a tale of survival, bravery, and the quiet heroism of one man who chose to act when it mattered most. It reminded everyone that even in the harshest conditions, hope can survive, and human kindness can make the difference between life and death. Emily's parents often reflected on the miracle of her rescue. They were deeply grateful to Tom, not only for saving her life, but for showing that compassion and bravery could still exist in the world. They told Emily that she was lucky not just to survive, but to have encountered someone who cared enough to act decisively and selflessly. Emily nodded quietly, understanding the truth in their words. She had survived through a combination of her own determination and the kindness of a stranger who had chosen to help. In the years that followed, Emily often returned to the edge of the valley, hiking carefully, but always with a sense of reverence for the place that had challenged her so deeply. She thought about the nights she had spent in the cold, the fear that had pressed against her, and the relief that had come with Tom's arrival. The experience had taught her lessons about patience, courage, and the unpredictable nature of life. She carried these lessons into her work, her relationships, and her daily life, knowing that they would remain with her forever. Tom, on his part, continued his quiet life, but he felt a subtle change in himself. He was reminded that even small, ordinary lives can intersect with extraordinary circumstances. He realized that his own acts he might have considered simple or routine, had the power to transform someone's life completely. It was a lesson in humility, courage, and the value of human connection that stayed with him quietly, shaping the way he approached the world and the people in it. The story of Emily and the Lonely Cowboy became a tale told and retold in Willow Creek, not as a sensational headline, but as a reminder of the quiet heroism that exists in everyday life. It was a story about hope, resilience, and the way human beings can support each other even in the harshest conditions. It reminded everyone that survival is never only about strength. It is about courage, compassion, and the willingness of others to step in when it counts the most. In the end, Emily Parker's 4-day ordeal in the freezing forest and her rescue by Tom Whitaker became more than a story of survival. It became a story of human kindness, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest moments, people can make a difference in each other's lives. It was a story about the quiet power of compassion and the courage it takes to act without hesitation, simply because it is the right thing to do. Emily would never forget that night, nor would Tom. Their paths may have diverged after that snowy February, but the impact of their encounter remained. In every memory, in every retelling, the warmth of that cabin, the kindness of a stranger, and the miracle of survival would live on. They had both been changed. Emily, with a renewed sense of life and hope, and Tom with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing he had made a difference when it mattered most. And in the quiet town of Willow Creek, the story remained a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and the human heart, inspiring anyone who heard it to believe in the goodness